Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask an Expert. This is Jessa. I'm here with Kinsey to host our expert for today, who is Kate Rogers, tuning in all the way from Australia. And Kate is a 4-star event rider and an OTT specialist. And I left off B there because in Australia, they tend to say OTT. In North America, they tend to say OTTB. I think that's to be inclusive of the standard bred racing that also happens, like the off the track standard breds. And they're called standees in Australia. These are the things I learned in preparation for speaking with Kate. And just to, hopefully let our Aussie friends, who we're getting more and more Aussie friends by the day, and we're so happy for that, but to kind of be speaking the right lingo. So shout out to Mercedes for helping us kind of know the correct lingo. But first, Kate, thank you so much for being here with us so we can talk about OTT training. I hope that's the right way to say it, but training thoroughbreds who are off the track and learn more about your story.
Thank you so much, Jess and Kinsey. It's amazing to be on the show, and I appreciate you having me on this morning. And welcome from Queensland, Australia, where it's actually the middle of winter and I'm here in a t-shirt. So it's lovely weather over here, and I'm looking forward to joining in this morning and listening to both your questions and your riders' questions.
So you are in a totally different season, and also you're already embarking on Wednesday, right?
Yeah, we are. So it's now Wednesday morning here. It's actually a very interesting week in Brisbane, in Queensland, Australia. So it's actually the Echo Week, which is one of our biggest equestrian shows as well as exhibition shows. So it's a bit like a really big ag show. So it's a public holiday today for a lot of people in Queensland, in Australia. And so yeah, Wednesday a public holiday, and I get to spend the morning here for an hour with you guys. So it's fantastic. It's great fun.
Wow, I didn't know about that. We're going to have to put the Australian holidays on our calendars so we can keep up. And for anybody who's just listening after the fact and not watching right now, Kate has the most beautiful gallery of her horses competing in the background, and also 2 beautiful garlands hung up on the wall with them. She told me beforehand they're called garlands. I was like, what are the floral necklaces called again? And she told me garlands. So, but yeah, it's really, you're in a beautiful spot, and it's really fun to see some of those memories behind you. Will you tell us, I guess let's hear more about your story and start from the beginning. How did you get into horses in general? And then where did the thoroughbreds come into the mix?
Okay, so actually I'll just start with those garlands and those photos behind me, because I think that's a really good entry point into the conversation. So we actually had a competition running in Queensland called the Triathlon, and it was a showcase for the public of eventing in the express format for off-the-track thoroughbreds. So we actually competed in a short format, like a 4-minute dressage test, a cross-country round, which I think was about 1:40, and then a show jumping round. And they actually put a fair amount of money. So I think the competition was worth about $10,000 Australian, and was only open to 10 or 12 horses. And I won it in 2017. And then in 2018, the horse I was riding, he was 3-star by the time. So they actually gave him a penalty. He ran second, but yeah, he penalised. But yeah, it was great fun, and it was really good to get the community together, both the racing community as well as the equestrian community, to showcase these thoroughbreds. So that's a couple of memories. That horse, he went to 4-star in Australia and ended up over in the UK. So that's his story and his memories. So to start off, I was one of those kids that didn't have horsey parents. I was horse crazy. I think it started from a book called Robert the Rose Horse, and I used to love that book. And I always said I wanted a horse, and Mum and Dad were into sailing. They had nothing to do with horses, and eventually I'd wear them down. So Christmas holidays, I'd go for a trail ride, and then I found a local riding club, and I'd get to go up there on a Saturday and have an hour-long trail ride. And my love for the riding grew from there. And by the time I was sort of 8 or 9, I started to get to go to pony club on a lease pony. And that's where I sort of decided I really loved jumping. I love going to the paddocks and jumping fences cross country. So after pestering mum and dad for quite a long time, I managed to convince them that I needed my own horse, and I must have been about 12. And the first horse I got was a Thoroughbred. So I think that partly was to do with the price range. But we found a Thoroughbred for me, and I took him all the way up to B grade show jumping, which is probably metre 30. I don't show jump so much, between metre 30. I don't show jumping so much anymore these days. And then my second little Thoroughbred, she took me to most of the national competitions in Australia. So that's sort of how I cracked into it. So straight off ponies into Thoroughbreds. I rode in Tassie for a few years on those two horses, and then after school, I ended up as one of those kids having a couple of years off before uni, and I took up riding track work. So that's my introduction into the racing industry. I ended up riding up to 18 horses a day. I was breaking in. I was doing the breeding season. I was getting horses ready for the sales. And the horses sort of became a little bit more of an income earner rather than a pleasure for a couple of years. So I flew the nest and ended up just trying to make my way through life, just trying to keep some money in the bank account. I got a free horse after a couple of years of riding track work. I managed to get given a horse, and I took that horse. He went to 4-star. He went in Adelaide 3 times, back when it was still called 3-star. He at that level. And then from there, I've ridden a lot of horses, a handful of all sorts of other breeds, obviously the warm bloods, stock horses, paints, whatever come my way, but I've always had the passion for the Thoroughbreds. So I think 5 years riding track work and actually handling those Thoroughbreds and getting to know them gave me a sort of an insight to what the horses go through, as well as my performance career. For the past 20 years, I've been back eventing. So I've sort of always ended up finding that I do love the Thoroughbreds. They're very quick to learn, and that's sort of been a really nice blend of having a background of what the horses actually go through and what their day-to-day life looks like, and then obviously the blend of being able to event as well and giving them the education post-racing to be successful in that career, plus a host of other careers. Not all horses off the track will be suitable for eventing.
That is so interesting. And so you just said something that I'm shocked hasn't really come to my mind much, which is you intimately understood the life before being off the track for these horses and what, like, you've been there for it. And I think a lot of people have, embarked on restarting a directly off the track thoroughbred or a green thoroughbred. But like understanding who these horses are and kind of what life they're bringing with them to their next career is really interesting and really unique too. And I'm sure also made you a much stronger rider in general and rider of thoroughbreds specifically. You mentioned riding to the 4-star level. Did you ride to the 4-star level on 2 different horses and they were both off the track thoroughbreds?
Yeah, that's correct. So the first one, he was the freebie that I got when I was sort of quite young and sort of still living paycheck to paycheck. And the second horse, he's Global Victory, the one behind me that's now competing over in England. So I got him as a 5-year-old. I think he won his first FEI 4-star. I think it was still called 3-star back in 2018, 19 when I sold him. So he did that in 3 years. He was quite a successful horse. And so look, I've done it a few different ways with a few different horses. I've had quite a few star class horses that I've found homes for. Most of that's been a sort of a business decision. I'd like to hope that I've got one in the paddock at the moment. It's going to get back up the grades and I'll be able to keep for a few years. But as all riders know, sometimes when you need to upgrade and replace your gooseneck or your truck or whatever it is, fencing, these decisions get made. So that's sort of been my journey a little bit, and sometimes why some of my upper star class horses get moved on. So
it's a constant moving puzzle of how is this all going to work. This will be my last kind of getting to know you question, and then Kins, I'll hand it over to you for some Q&A. But is your day-to-day life right now and business focused on getting these horses off the track? And is it mostly a sales operation, or what? I mean, I guess kind of like, will you describe your business as it is today?
Yeah. So I work a day job somehow around all this. Luckily, there's a little bit of flexibility in what I do. I'm in a sales and marketing role currently. So I tend to get up early, get the horses out, go to work. And then of an afternoon, I generally work 4 to 5 horses. I've currently got 7 here, so there's a handful. And then I've got 2 competition horses of my own. They are both Thoroughbreds. Generally, I tend to keep one and sell one and have an up-and-coming one. And then I've got horses here that are directly like a horse that I'll have for a short term to sell, or they'll be one that I have through a 12-week retraining program. Got 2 of them in work at the moment. And all the other model is that, as like a normal retrainer would, I do a weekly fee and have horses come to me for a set period of time. Now, that could be because they're on the market to be sold, or it might be that someone out there has found a horse that they quite like through an actual trainer, and they say, oh, gee, we'd really like this horse to go through a program or retraining. Can you have it for a period of time? And then I will put some work into the horse and give it the foundations required to be able to go out there and be able to handle some general pleasure riding. It might be that they want the horse to do a bit of jumping or pony club, or maybe they just want the horse to have a basis so it's a little bit happier when it goes out and enters the sort of world of life, I guess, after racing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got a question in chat from Mercedes, actually, and she's wondering if they still run the tri-equithon.
Look, I wish they did. They ran it for those couple of years, and then they had a year up, I think, where they backed it up in there was one early in 2001, and then COVID sort of put a pause on it. So it was being run in Victoria as well as in Queensland, so 2 different states of Australia. It'd be wonderful if they ran it again. We're certainly at the stage where there's a lot of really big and exciting off-the-track opportunities for competitions in Australia. So the one I just mentioned, that show that's on at the moment, they've got a $50,000 show jumping class on. There's some really big, exciting opportunities, but definitely Triathlon was great because it was at the race course. So it was really good that the general public could watch the races and then see where these horses went and what they went on to do post-racing. So I thought it was a brilliant initiative, and I hope it comes back because it really is great fun. Fantastic.
That really is an amazing initiative. It's so smart to do that because, yeah, racing does get a lot of attention from either like non-equestrians or horse enthusiasts, and the other disciplines don't so much. I love that they approached it that way. And anybody who might have missed the memo, we are talking about Mercedes. Mercedes runs the Ride IQ Australia community. So she helped us connect with Kate, and she helped us really get anything that exists in Australia. We have Mercedes to thank. So when you hear that name, that is why. Kate, I would love to talk about kind of just like the beginning of getting a thoroughbred off the track and into your barn for retraining. Where do you start, and what are the kind of different buckets that you're focusing on, whether that's like groundwork or nutrition? And will you just kind of opine on that initial phase of having a thoroughbred in your barn?
Yeah, definitely. So quite a lot of the time, I actually don't see the horses before they get to me. I've had quite a strong connection with a lady called Jane Gollan, whose husband is Tony Gollan, who's one of Brisbane's leading trainers. So Jane quite often has vetted the horses for me. She knows them either in the racing industry or she's had people approach her. I also have people approach me through Racing Queensland. I genuinely sort of look, when I say sound horses, a lot of them will come to me and there's something we manage, whether it's the horse has had something happen post-racing, hence why it's retired, or it's got slow and it's no longer feasible to keep racing that horse. But if it is one that's happened to have a minor injury, I think management is just the key to that. Knowing what it is makes a really big difference. So generally the horses come to me, we've got a little bit of an idea of their background, their veterinary history, and I think that's really important. I sort of always try to say to clients, look, horses are like us as humans. There's always something we're managing. So whether that's, look, I've got a bit of a stiff ankle, or I hit my knee years ago and I know if I do a heap of squats I'm going to get a sore knee. Well, we sort of know that we need to work on building up our body strength around that, but also we're sort of managing. So whether that's through supplements or through farrier work or whatever that individual horse requires to keep it sound as possible and as happy. So I guess that's one of the key parts of understanding the horse when it first comes to me. We tend to always let the horses have a letdown after racing. So let the feed come out. So they're obviously on a very high grain diet when they're racing. Quite often they've been stabled for the majority of the day. So it's nice to let the horses have a good 6 to 8 weeks out the paddock, back on pasture, change that feed from being really high grain back to a lot of roughage, and change it onto a feed that's going to be suitable for its retraining. So I guess that's sort of the first bit post-racing, making sure that any injuries or whatever they're carrying has a time to sort of heal if there's something there, rehabilitate, making sure the horse is happy, healthy, back out being in the paddock. Because I think that's a big thing with me, is I think you really need to make sure that the horses are happy in their mindset the whole way through retraining, because if you don't have a happy horse, it's like taking someone and trying to get them to learn when they really, really just, they're like, I don't want to be here. Nothing's going to happen, right? So we need to make sure that the horses are happy in the first instance. So when horses come to me, obviously having them shot up suitably for the work they're going to be in, making sure if there's anything like dental work that's done early on. So we sort of try to touch base on those sort of things. So the horse sort of has the foundations to be able to start the program and be successful from the outset. I feed a lot of hay here, really good quality hay, and then top up with hard feed from there. So really that will help too if they've had any sort of stomach ulcers. That's another thing that we might be looking after in a horse. Getting them onto a high roughage diet generally tends to assist and winding down that grain. So it's a lot easier to work with a horse that's not bouncing around, picking off the walls, the one that's relaxed and has got a stomach full of food and they're healthy and happy. So generally that sort of is a good starting foundation. The first couple of weeks of a horse once they're here, I generally do a fair bit on the ground. So some horses, they come to me and they can't lunge, for example. So if you're going to have a horse that goes out into the community post a retraining program, they need to be able to be lunged. They need to understand how to be led and not barge past you and be on their hind legs going, hey. So we make sure that they know how to lead properly, that they have manners when they're led, that they can be lunged over long rein. I do things like desensitization and that actually builds up a lot of trust too. So whether that's I get like a brightly coloured feed bag or a couple of different things that I might have, and get the horse just to go, okay, this person isn't going to hurt me when they approach me. Look, a lot of them are quite good. Some of them will just stand there half asleep. Some of them, they're like, whoa. So we do a bit of desensitization. This is like a little bit of a farm. So there's things like quad bikes going around. There's an airport within a K and a half. And when I say an airport, it's like an aerial display type airport. So you might get 3 or 4 planes doing acrobatics in the air or flying low, and it's really quite good. An air show once a year, so the horses get to see that. I think that's quite a good desensitization experience for them. I've got cattle, there's cats, there's little dogs that lunge, like we think they like to help when you lunge. So I sort of allow all that to happen, because you can't micromanage a horse's environment post, like when they leave here. And I think that's all very natural things that are going to happen in their environment. So I like to let those things happen. So once they've sort of had a little bit of time on the ground and I can lunge them, and I use voice commands through the lunging process, I find that really helps. I'll also do a little bit like on the ground about moving them left and right, so pressure, like before I get on a ride. So you've got to think these horses are conditioned to someone riding with a lot shorter stirrup. They generally just go around the bull ring, they'll go out and then they'll go around the racetrack. They don't need that sort of lateral type work off the rider's leg, and a lot of them just are clueless to it. So I do that from the ground, and then I've also got my voice commands off the ground as well. And so generally by the time I get on, my horses can then start working on the 4 basics. And when I talk about the 4 basics, it's really, really important that we have forwards, we have stop, we have left, and we have right. So I start that work in the round yard, and that's a really safe environment for both me and the horses. But then I sort of can then start doing some like spiraling exercises or a little bit of left and right off the legs. I have my first canter on the horse in the round yard. It's a safe environment in case they do have a bit of a buck or something like that. It's a really good working environment. So come the end of the 2 weeks, that's sort of where I'm at. I've got a horse that can go forwards through the gates, it can go left, it can go right, it can stop. I try to get the horses to then also learn off the seat. So they might have had a jockey that quite often you see the jockeys in 2 points, so they're not on the saddle. I want the horses to know off my seat when I go, well, and they feel my way through. Okay, that's when we come back, because I like a quite soft horse. I don't like a horse that's going to pull your arms out. So it's quite nice to work on that as well, your seat, all in that sort of experience. And then come week 3, we sort of start getting out onto the arena. And again, it's working just on those basics about making sure that we've got brakes, making sure that the horse will go forward when asked. That starts to do the basics of leg yielding. So I've got left and right. We're sort of starting to do 20-metre circles and a few exercises, riding in straight lines, getting the horse into a contact, and we build from there. So that's the sort of basics. If you'd like me to keep elaborating where I go from there, I can divulge a few more stories if you're happy for me to keep talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will get there for sure. Before we jump into kind of the next steps after that, I'm curious how many days a week are these horses working when they initially, after they're done with their turnout? Are you bringing them out of their stall or like out of like their relaxation to work like 3 days a week, or how many days a week?
Yeah, so it's generally 5. Sometimes I'm away competing with other horses over the weekend. If I'm here, it could be 6. But I don't do, like, what we need to think about these horses is we're now rebuilding all their muscles to cope with the strain of like for dressage and jumping. So it's a gradual process. So these horses might only do 20 minutes up to half an hour in a session. I don't drill them for an hour. What I'm talking about, doing a lot of this sort of work off the ground, left and right, it's done from a halt, and you're just generally using pressure in those steps to the left, those steps to the right. The long reining obviously is done in walk. I can do a little long reining in the round yard where I'm actually doing some trot work, but it's not really intense. So they're actually on a gradual incline for the work that they're in. I find 20 minutes sort of isn't like enough generally. Once you start pushing past that, you start getting a horse that by day 3 or 4, they've got sore muscles. They sort of start going, oh, it's a bit sore, I don't really want to work. So that's been my formula. Look, 5 days a week, and that's a mix. Like even at the end of their program, they still might get a day where I go, look, I've done 2 days in the dressage arena. I want to go jump, 2 days out. How about they just have an easier day and we'll give them a lunge? Or sometimes I get a sense of a horse and they need to be worked 6-7 days a week. I've had a couple that just need that consistency. Those 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they just need to be worked. And then some of them are just like, geez, after day 3 or 4, I just want to go for a walk out the front paddock with my mate and go for a walk around the cows and do something that's not so strenuous. So the sessions are sort of, generally 20 minutes to half an hour and quite varied. And when I talk about variation, I think that's something that we need to be mindful that the horses at the track, the racetrack, have quite a consistent program. So every morning they'll get up and they'll go out and they'll do their track work in the morning. They might finish that with a swim. They might go on the walker. But generally their program is quite consistent, where it's when they come from the racetrack into the retraining environment, one day they're at the front paddock going around the cows for some training. The next day they're over poles. The next day they might be in the dressage arena. The day after that might be a lunge. The day after that it's grid work. And so the horses might get worked in the morning. They might get worked in the afternoon, on property, off property. And so it is a little bit stressful. And those things we need to keep in mind, that the horses sort of go, oh, this isn't exactly what I was used to. But I do try to keep things quite consistent. And there's a lot of things that are familiar to the horses that they've already experienced in racing. For example, I use cross ties and I use, hosing down the cross ties and things like that they're sort of familiar with. But then sort of also get them to a point that they need to hard tie and they need to do things that they're going to get exposed to out there post this sort of transition phase. So
That, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it seems like you have a great environment to teach them to like be horses. When you have a horse that comes in that is especially like fire breathing, like whites of the eyes, hot about everything, do you approach that horse's training any different, or did they kind of settle to the energy of the horses around them and to you? Like, how does it differ when you have that type of energy in a horse that comes in?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Jess. I have a couple that I can, when you ask that question, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember those ones. So I guess initially every horse that sort of comes off a truck that turns up here, I put them in the round yards. So if they've got steam to blow, they do it in a really safe environment. Secondly to that, having horses around them that are in work, that are calm, actually makes a really, really big difference. If a horse is extremely excitable, I will put them onto just a hay ration for the first couple of days till they've had a bit of work. And some of that groundwork that I do in the round yard, they will be able to blow a little bit of steam. And then by the time they've had 2 or 3 days, they're generally a lot safer to catch and lead up from the paddock, and they've had that chance to blow the steam off, and they're not being pumped full of grain, and they're sort of like, this isn't that stressful. We're just going to come in here and do a bit of work. So I sort of find that that's the initial stage, and then I can start to bring and reintroduce the feed again. Sometimes you get a highly strung horse. I've got a little chestnut mare here at the moment, and she, like I say, chestnut mares are the red flag of the horse world, right? She is, or was, a firecracker, and mostly under saddle too. So she had one speed, and that was flat out. She raced like that. She raced as a horse that jumps out of the barrier, would gallop flat out the whole way around the racetrack. And so all she knew was fast. And we would start to do a little bit of trot work was okay. We'd start to go into counter, and it was like gallop. So she's actually taken a little bit longer, but she's turning into a really nice horse now. She works very soft on a loose rein now, but it was just a process where it was just consistency and keeping the work into her and just riding it day in, day out, day in, day out. Again, sometimes it would only be 20 minutes, half an hour, but it was just keeping the work consistent. And she's turned the corner completely now. I had beginners on a couple of weeks ago. Kids had never ridden, and they actually rode her as their first horse. And so she's really changed, but she's a horse that just took a retraining program. I mean, she's 12 months post-racing now. She's 95 eventing. So she's taken a little while, but the horse actually is a lot happier. But sometimes you need to spend that time with those horses and get those basics established, because although she has an amazing jump, there's no point taking a horse like that out and jumping it any higher while they're still really adrenalized and thinking that, 100 miles an hour is the only answer. So as much as she's got a lot of scope and talent and she'll be a star class horse down the track, I've had to spend a lot of time just getting the basics and left her in 80 centimetre eventing just to get her calmed down and just to make sure that she could can around a cross-country track without galloping. And I actually remember getting a bucket load of time penalties on a couple of events because I just literally just made her just go nice and soft and quiet. I'm not out here to win an 80 centimetre event with a horse like that. Like, she's got a lot of talent. I'd rather see her be able to go on a loose rein with a bit more speed at the high level eventing. So I think, there's a different approach with some of them. If they're here only for a little bit of time and they are just a little bit hot on the ground, a little bit rude to lead up from the paddock, just altering a bit of feed and giving them a little bit of work sometimes makes a bit of a difference.
Yeah. How cool that like some kids were riding her this week.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be so, you have to feel so good when you see them evolve like that into a happy, calm horse. I'm curious whether, like, she's probably a great example. Do you bit her up? I think this is something that a lot of people with green horses, especially with that sort of a mindset, like they just want to go. They feel uncertain whether it's like, well, should I be playing with the bits, or is there hope that with training and time and exposure, that horse's whole demeanor will just calm down so that you don't need the, twisted full cheek or whatever it is?
Yeah. She's an interesting one, actually, that little horse. She goes in quite a soft bit at home. She's in a truffed flexi soft. So she likes to work in a softer frame. She's actually, dressage, I'd like to see a little bit more into the contact. But when she gets a little bit panicked and she wanted to really go at 100 miles an hour, I mean, I've got some muscles in my forearms and my upper arms, but Jesus, I remember one event I took, because I was riding it just in a normal snaffle, and I went into the show jumping, and I rode the show jumping around. I went, and she blew up. She actually got really hot in the warm up, and took her out and did a round. I thought, wow, this is not happening for cross country. And I actually I did put a stronger bit on her, and that's one of those events that I just said, you are just going to can around here very slowly. I don't mind if we chop the whole thing. And now, so cross country, I do run her in a stronger bit, but she runs on a very loose rein on it. Only because if she really gets panicked and that adrenaline kicks in fast is the answer. I think I'll go back to just being a snaffle. I think she's pretty close to that. Certainly at home here, I jump her and everything. Just she's soft as, she's lovely. So I guess there's a couple of points in that story. One, you have to be safe. There is no point trying to be as brave as you want and going out there and not having control of your horse. So again, that goes back to the fundamentals of being able to go, stop, left and right. You need to be able to steer your horse, and you need to be able to stop your horse. Definitely work on those basics though, like I said, about using your seat to stop your horse, using voice commands. That all will help. And then that's how you sort of incorporate all of that to getting a horse that you can ride a little bit softer. I think don't allow your horse to pull. Now, when I say don't allow your horse to pull, if you're out and you're going for a trot, you're out going for a canter somewhere, and your horse is constantly leaning on the bit, my sort of analogy for this is like driving a car around with your handbrake half cranked on. You're going to wear your brakes out. So if you actually want your horse to whoa, make sure that actually happens, and then soften and relax those aids, and then start going again. If you're constantly allowing your horse to lean on the bit, like, and lug down on it, when you get out on cross country, you're not going to have anything. You've got nothing more. Like, that handbrake's been, nearly pulled on the whole time, so you don't have anything. And I think that goes back to making sure those basics are right at home. If your horse is like that, if you go out and you canter and it starts pulling, it doesn't listen, come back to trot, still pulling, come back to walk. Relax. The second it slows down, go, good horse. Okay, let's start the trot work again. So start getting too fast for you, they're not listening, bring them back to walk. And that repetition and being extremely disciplined with not letting them pull actually is one of the best bits of advice I received as a rider quite a few years ago. And that's really sort of then meant that I've followed that through with quite a few other horses. And I think that's really, really important. So for anyone that has got a really strong horse, don't try to be a hero. If you need to put something slightly stronger on, work with a coach to find something that's going to work for you. But then keep working on those fundamentals about teaching your horse to come back off your seat, particularly both in the dressage arena and then once you start out in the paddocks or the fields or in your fitness work.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And it's relevant to a question we got in chat from Pam. She's saying she has a four-year-old off the track thoroughbred that is hanging on the bit. And she's asking, should she possibly need to change the bit? And she's saying her 4-year-old has been off the track since April and has been in training for the last 3 months. And she's currently using an NS Tactio turtle top bit.
Yeah, so I certainly would go back to doing some of those basics. It's like just even walking and halting, and make sure you're using your seat and your voice. All my horses learn whoa. And then I find that helps too. And steady's another one I'll use. I go, steady. And they sort of just kind of go, oh, okay, because quite often you're doing a bit of trot work and you're just asking for a half hold or something like that. And they're just like, oh, I'm just still going. And you just use that little bit of voice and they go, they just soften underneath you. It's a great feeling. So I would just follow that little bit of advice I was just talking about, is that just be disciplined, because if you do this for 2 weeks or 3 weeks of just going every single time that they pull, bring them back a gear, and then release the pressure the second they do the right thing, the repetition will work, right? She can work with a coach or a bit fitter to try some different options. I'd recommend using something 3 or 4 times to see if it works, see if it's effective. Some horses will work through different pressure, obviously off the bars or off the tongue, or sometimes a little bit of chain and chin pressure or pole pressure. So depending on your horse, it's quite often advisable to work with a bit fitter, someone that understands. your horse's mouth and what will work for them, and then keep working on those basics. But it's just repetition, unfortunately. But if you do it, it does work. So I think that's the consistency and being self-disciplined to go, okay, well, today I wanted to go out and I wanted to jump, but all of a sudden I'm still in the dressage arena because the horse is just, stop listening to me. Okay, fine. Today's session changes and we just keep going walk, halt, trot, walk, trot, walk, trot, walk. And then, and it's sort of like even in the trot work, we'll learn maybe we might do some lengthened trot strides and then back to more of a collected trot. And that's all using your seat, right? And so the more you do that sort of work, transitions within the gates or transitions down the gates, you're using voice, using seat, the horse is going to learn, and they're going to learn to listen to those aids. And don't, again, best bit of advice, don't let them lean on the bit. Don't just do circle after circle after circle, trying to improve your forearm muscles. If you want to do that, go to the gym and lift some weights. So yeah, that's probably my best bit of advice.
So when they lean on the bit, you are usually transitioning down to the gate down, and then will they be leaning less and you kind of give and reward? Is that how it works?
Well, it's depending on the horse and the situation. Some of them might just get to canter work and they're used to a trackwork rider bridging the reins and leaning down, like leaning their hands into the horse's neck. A horse has actually learned to lean. One of my trainers actually taught me to years ago, 20 years ago, is you bridge your reins, and then when the horse gets up the straight, give it a couple of flicks with the whip, kick it up into the bit, and teach it to pull, which is quite interesting because we're trying to do the opposite here, right? So some people might just find that the horse actually starts going a little bit too fast and it's sort of not listening to the seat, and it's not listening to the hands, so they just keep pulling on it, right? And that's where I was like, okay, maybe you need a couple of stronger half halts there, right? And then bring your horse back. One of the things I'll sort of explain, another thing that I do is when I'm sort of walking around in those first initial rides, and obviously you're slowing your seat, you've got boys, is I don't know if you can see my hands, but I actually do a little bit of that 1, 2, 3 with my hands, right? And then the horse sort of then gets to the 1, 2, and then they're stopped, and then they just feel you do just a tighten of the fist on the reins, right? And then they come back. So and that sort of is a little bit when you get to those half halts, and it can just be a little bit of a tighten of the little finger, the finger up, right? It doesn't have to be a full hand squeeze on the reins, but my horses do learn to that as well. So it's not where the horse is pulling and I'm pulling dead straight back at them. Sometimes I'll just give them a couple of little quick ones, and they'll listen and then they'll come back. So yeah, hopefully that little bit of advice helps. But the tug of war theory does not work. So just bring them back, and then once they're back in their gate, yes, be very quick to relax and soften and reward the horse. So as most riders know, horses do work from pressure and release. We put pressure on and the horse does the right thing, we take the pressure off. So exactly that. If we need to apply a bit of pressure, apply the pressure and then release the pressure once the horse is showing that it's doing the correct thing, reward it for its good behavior.
I like that 1, 2, 3 exercise a lot. That makes sense. And seems like, your horse is learning what's coming next and adjusting accordingly. Christine, hi Christine. Thank you for being here. She's in chat. She said, my 4-year-old off the track thoroughbred will toss his head when he's tired or frustrated. How do you draw the line between quitting before he gets to this point and not allowing him to decide when the ride is over? So firstly, I want to know why the horse is tossing his head. Christine, you might have gone through this, but I would probably check dental first, and check the fit of your bit and your bridle. Certainly, you want to make sure the horse is happy for any work that it goes into. So I just double check those things. Most people probably have, but that's always something to cross out just to make sure that that's not going on. Look, sometimes I find when a horse gets to the end of their session, you can start to feel that they're sort of going, oh, it's like you're pushing someone at the gym and you're like, 10 more reps. And they're like, do I have to? Come on. And you sort of, it's nice to always end on a nice note. So obviously at the start of your work, I tend to do some long and low work. At the end of my work, I tend to do some long and low work. Even if your horse finishes on just a couple of trot circles that are a little bit softer and long and low, or it's a walk for 5 minutes, once you start to feel that session you've done enough,
look, there's a really good saying that goes along the lines of good riders know when to quit. And if you start to get to that point and you've done enough, you've gone over what you were trying to achieve from, maybe you've been working on transitions for the day before, top cannon transitions, right? You've done a few, your horse is starting to feel like, geez, this is starting to feel a bit too much. Okay, that's enough for today. And yeah, finish that ride up. And then maybe do something different the next day. I think drilling horses with the same work every day, particularly off the trackers, you're constantly then working on the same muscles. And I think it's nice to actually go and do something a little bit easier every now and again, just to keep them happy. So usually a happy mindset makes a really big difference in these horses. So maybe the next day, take your horse out and go for a ride with another rider. And you can achieve a lot just going for a walk out, a hack out, and then go back into arena the day after. So yeah, so my advice would be just make sure, just double check there's not something that you've missed there for that head tossing. Maybe work with a coach. It might be where either the rider's weight or the horse is working in a position that's got pole pressure somewhere, you know, that you haven't quite picked up on. It's always good to have eyes on the ground. And then if you are sort of recognizing, okay, 17 minutes, this horse knows 17 minutes is its point, maybe that's enough. Look, I used to, years ago in my younger years, drill my horses. I used to do a lot of work on them, you know, like hour-long sessions. And then I soon realized that actually I get a lot better result off those shorter sessions where the horses come in and they get their work done in a shorter period of time. And they just tend to finish the session in a better mindset. They're happier. And yeah, so each to their own. Look, I know a lot of riders will actually go for a hack out first, particularly where it's colder. In Queensland, we're working with horses in normally plus 30 degrees and a lot of humidity. So if you spend half an hour on them before you start doing your work, they're white with foamy sweat. So you've sort of got to balance your actual warm up plus your session, and then obviously a cool down session. It's nice to get them under the cold water here as well. So I tend to sort of do enough of a warm up that's going to have all those muscles warmed up and tendons, everything flexing and working before I start any sort of like jumping work or any harder dressage work. But with the off the trackers, yeah, certainly a shorter session, achieve what I need to achieve, recognizing that horse has either had enough. And a lot of the time I find that had enough means that their muscles have been working in the same sort of way for 3 or 4 days in a row. And that actual behavior is stemming from a horse that's gone, hey, I'm a little bit tender today. I don't really want to have to go and use all those same muscles again. And so that's when I'll train it up. And I might just do a lunging session or desensitization session or something a little bit different just to let them have a little bit of mid-recovery, or so recovery midweek or something, is generally when I find that happens. So,
Kate, how do you decide your horses are ready to move on to the next level of difficulty? Like you talked about kind of the phases of their work once they get into your program. When do you decide, like, okay, this horse is ready to move on from ground poles to grid work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kinsey. So I think I put my horses through a similar program at the start, and that's almost like primary school. Once you start to get to high school, some horses will show a natural ability or affinity to, might be to jumping. And some of them will go, I'm just going to fall over every single pole you put on the ground. I have no athletic ability whatsoever. And that's fine, you know? So then I start to tailor my program out to look at what the horses are sort of either athletically channeling. Some of them might be carrying or had an injury. Maybe they did a bit of a tendon injury. So jumping might not be an option for that horse. And so then we start having some fun with some different dressage movements. I mean, I've had horses here that at the end of a 12-week program are doing simple changes. Like some horses are just amazing, like, and just are built and go, bang, 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 this is so easy. Other horses at the end of like a 12-week program, sometimes, you know, they're still struggling to get the right canter lead. So depending on the horse and depending on how they were muscled up post-racing and how they raced through their racing career will have a little bit of an influence. And then, so once I know that my horse has those basic foundations of being able to go forward, stop, left, right, they've got enough muscular strength to start introducing things like small fences. And why I say this is important, those foundations, is there's no point introducing your horses to like a log or a cross rail or whatever, unless you can ride the horse in a straight line, unless you can stop the horse, unless the horse moves forward off the leg. Those basics are so important, right? So, and then I find once I've really got them established, if the horse has got like a natural jump, it's going to start to happen, you know, quite easily. And again, it's about, okay, first session might be some poles on the ground. Then we might start just doing a smaller fence. Might do a couple of smaller fences, and then we might start with a little grid. And I find grid work is almost like a gymnastic type exercise for the horses, and it starts working on some of those muscles which we hadn't started to work through the groundwork or through the lunging or through the dressage phases. So we start doing some grid work, and then they get the idea of it. And some of the horses that you really get the idea of jumping are good fun at that stage. And then we sort of look to progress at taking them off the property and going and showing them some jumps somewhere else, or do some cross-country schooling. We might take them out and show them a water jump. I find a lot of them actually, here in Australia, we do a lot of work with our racehorses through water. Most of them go into the water quite easily. So yeah, that's the jumping sort of journey, I guess, and pathway. If the horse isn't going to become a jumping horse, which some aren't, we might find that horse is quite good looking. It might be destined for the show ring, so we might work on some of those things that they're going to require if they're going to go into that sort of pathway. So that might be that we teach it how to do the leg classes. We might teach it, you know, obviously the changes through trot, changes through walk. We tailor that horse to a slightly different program. I've had horses that are neither pretty enough to be backering or talented enough to jump, but with a really sweet heart. And we've done some really different things. So we've taken them through some obstacles, grabbed things and teach them, you know, taught them that they can have things hanging off them. There's more desensitization, because they're probably going to end up being trail ridden or going to a pleasure home. And I think that environment in itself can sometimes be more stimulating than an environment where they're going to go and get ridden around at home every day by a kid and then go to pony club or somewhere else. Like a horse that goes into trail riding environment sometimes needs to be ridden by itself, which for a horse that's been a herd animal and that's always had horses around it at the racetrack or horses around it here, horse going out for a ride by itself, that's scary. God knows what you're going to find on the trail ride. You might find dirt bikes coming at you or kangaroos jumping through the bushes. So there's a lot of challenges, I guess, if they're going to go out and do that. And then again, like people that go trail riding, you want to be able to enjoy it. You want your horse to be able to walk around and be relaxed and be able to eat your sandwich out of your saddlebag or whatever you're going to do. So we talk about trail riding in Australia. It's quite often where riders will either go out by themselves through the bush or with a group of other horses. So that's something that if they need to learn to do that, that's certainly a different way of programming and tailoring that horse's journey in the last couple of weeks with me. So yeah.
I hate when the kangaroos show up on my trail rides. Oh, this is so interesting. Like, I mean, I told you before we got on here, Kate, we've done 104 of these episodes, and I don't know if I've ever felt so much like, oh my God, I have like 2 hours worth of questions I still want to ask. I'll get to one that I think is important and kind of universally helpful, which is, what are some common mistakes you see people making with retraining thoroughbreds or just training green thoroughbreds? Does anything come to mind in that regard?
Yes, definitely. The biggest thing is people feed them way too much food. They feed them the wrong feed, and then they don't give them the work. And then they end up with a horse that is uncontrollable. So that might mean they're pulling back off where they're tied up to, you know, you just see it, you're like, oh my God. So I think that's the first thing which I mentioned at the start, is like, obviously thoroughbreds take a little bit of feed to keep the weight on them too. So don't get me wrong, like some people get these horses and they drop a lot of condition. I think putting horses through retraining is stressful enough, and particularly when they've been on a high grain diet, that they do tend to want to drop condition a little bit. Again, feed a lot of hay, and then work with, I mean, globally there's a range of different feeds on the market these days, but work with someone that knows what they're doing, whether that's a coach or there's a lot of programs out there now. We've got NutriKey with High Gain Australia. There's a couple of those programs where you can actually go to them and say, hey, look, I've got a thoroughbred. It does tend to get quite hot. what can I give it to keep condition on? So definitely feed, work, the consistency in the work. There is absolutely no point taking a horse out to a lesson or to a jumping day or whatever if you haven't been riding it through the week. I think even if you're really short on time and it gets a 15 or 20-minute lunge, or get something, just give it some work, because taking them out and jumping off their eyeballs never works. And then self-discipline and discipline with them. So when I say people make mistakes, is that they let the horse come up from the paddock and walk in front of them and eat the grass and have free rein. You have to put some barriers and some boundaries in there and be consistent with it and be disciplined in yourself, to make sure that you're following that and going to the horse, hang on, no, we have manners and we lead like this. And so I think that's a big one. Talking about that, I always use rope halters and lead ropes on my horses. Years ago, I used to use the good old fancy pretty ones with buckles, and after breaking quite a few, and I just don't find that they're effective enough too if you ever need a little bit more. So certainly that's another basic thing that I tend to now do. I don't talk about that a lot, but you'll always see my horses out in the rope halter and lead rope. What else is a general mistake? I think just people skip stages. So through a retraining program, they get taught to do a whole range of things, whether that's riding a horse head on with another horse coming at it, something like that. If you haven't done that, you haven't ridden in the arena with another horse, you take it out to a show, it's in a warm-up area, you've got horses coming head on, that horse just freaks out. They haven't seen it at the track. They used to always go in the same direction with horses traveling the same direction. So I think some of those things that as a retrainer that you put in is just I just do that in my retraining program. You don't think about it. People skip those steps and they get a horse out, and all of a sudden the horse just hasn't had the foundations or the building blocks or the tools in its toolbox to understand how to handle the situation or be sort of familiar with what it's going to experience. So.
Yeah, I feel like it could be really easy to, if it's not your full-time job to retraining these horses, to not realize these little things that these horses just aren't used to. So that's a really good one to point out. Maggie is in chat and she's wondering if you ever end up with any steeplechasers in your farm.
I don't. So in Australia, we steeplechase in the southern states. I think I might have had one that'd been over jumped a couple of years ago, but I generally don't. Now that I'm sort of based in Queensland, I don't. Look, I think they would be great to retrain as well. So if anyone's got some, send them my way. But I think just because in Queensland we mostly flat race, we don't race over fences. That's sort of just my location. And if you're not familiar with Australia, there's probably 2 days driving from the southern states up to Brisbane, Queensland. So that's sort of, I do get horses from far north. A lot of horses that slow down for the city racing will actually go out to our regional areas. So quite often I get horses that get trucked down to me from up north, but I don't get so many from down south. Yeah.
You mentioned the trail riding horse and how it's difficult because they are used to being in a herd and with other horses. What do you do when a horse is particularly nappy and having trouble even just like leaving the barn for your training session?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't get any too nappy here. Sort of the area where I do a lot of my work, where my round yard is and my dressage arena, my jump arena, sort of is surrounded sort of like in the middle of a semicircle, I guess, from my stables to paddocks. Look, I've got a few little things that I do as far as like, say, where my entry is to my arena. I don't let my horses just go straight out the exit when they finish their work. I actually always turn them into a little circle and come out. It was actually interesting. One of the other riders the other day saw me do that at the end of a dressage test the other day. I actually walked past A and did a little half circle and came out. He made a comment. He said, "Oh, I really quite like how you do that." And it's something that I just do at home naturally, and so I just, just don't let them sneak out the exit. So I think if you put those little steps in, and like I said, they're things I do subconsciously these days. They don't learn just to duck out the exit and head home. So if I'm going to teach a horse here to go out and get ready to go trail riding, I take it out my front paddock, which is away from all the other horses, but I take it out with a buddy. And when I partner it up, I find a horse that's already it's probably one of my competition horses. So I'll ride out and take the two horses out together. I'll do that for a little bit, and then I start to actually just go halfway up the driveway, and then I'll take it up the driveway, and I just increase the distance that horse is going out by itself, and then build on that. And once they do that and they realize, well, I can go out and turn around and come back and nothing ate me, no kangaroos chase me, then they build on their confidence. And we'll talk a little bit like that. I know we're getting close to time, but the kangaroos here used to be a problem, and I used to find the horses used to be so terrified of them. But once the horse realizes that either the kangaroos or the cows are actually more afraid of them, they develop confidence. So I'll slowly walk the horse towards whatever it's frightened of. Once it hops off, the cows walk away, the horses go, oh, I'm a bit tough, aren't I? And then they don't have to get so close, right? It's just about feeling when that horse just gets a little bit of a like, I'm a little bit unsure here, and then just wait, let them calm down, go, oh, I'm in a safe, I can take another step forward. Let the horses be inquisitive about where they're going. Don't force a horse into that situation, just allow them to step. And then when they're comfortable, they walk up and whatever it is hops off or jumps off or walks away. Do that a couple of times, and all of a sudden you see on a horse that goes, well, I can be inquisitive, I can walk forward, I feel safe and trust my rider. Whatever you're showing me is actually more afraid of me than what I am of it. I think if you go in there kicking and flapping whips and yee-hawing, the horses just go, holy beep, what should I be scared of? And that just creates like a situation you don't want to create. So there's a couple of tips there. Hopefully someone picks something up from that too.
Yeah, I love that. And Jordan, I know we're really close time here, so this will be the last question that I'll ask. But Jordan is wondering if you have any tips for suppling exercises for an older off-the-track thoroughbred who struggles to bend through the ribs and gets behind the bridle.
Yeah, okay. So I'd teach the horse to leg yield in the first instance, and then I'd start to do spiraling with a fair bit of leg yielding. Look, if the horse is stiff, that circle, look, 20-meter circles are kind of a little bit harsh. If you've got an open area, maybe it might be a 30-meter circle that you spiral down on this horse down to 20 meters and then back out. I mean, I certainly do it here on a 20-meter down to a 10 and back out. But the horses are a bit younger because they're straight off the track. And when you start doing that sort of work, keep a fair bit of bend on your horse. So you want to kind of keep their withers and their shoulders closer to the circle. You want to keep their hindquarters out, so they're sort of on that leg yield position. The more you can get your horse to bend off your leg, the more it will lower, and then it will stretch it and will go into a long and low contact. And that's obviously what we try and create here with the horses straight off the track, because when they're doing that and they're long and they're low, they're actually working all that top line and the muscles underneath the saddle. And then actual leg yields as well. And you can do them in walk, you can do them a little bit in trot. Just do something easy. Start with 2 meters off the edge of the arena and do a little bit of a leg yield across, and then you might increase to 3 meters. Next minute you're 5 meters in and you're on the 3/4 line doing a leg yield across to the outside. You might come up the short end of the arena, leg yield across to B or E, do a 20-meter circle, and then go up the other end, leg yield again from your 3/4 line, do a 20-meter circle. And then those sort of things, you're continuing that bend on that 20-meter circle that you've had off that leg yield. And then they start to come around your leg by doing a 20-meter circle at the end of that leg yield. Hopefully that helps. You can also do like a leg yield from the 3/4 line to sort of a 15-meter circle at B or E, and then leg yield back up to the other end of the arena as well. So doing some of those exercises, doing that off left rein, right rein, and then starting to leg yield from the outside of the arena in a little bit is another one that you can start to do as a build on that.
I love it. There are in my head, I was just going over all of like the nuggets of wisdom and actionable advice that you gave us in this 1 hour. And I think it's so immensely helpful. So I'm going to send this conversation to anybody with an off the track thoroughbred or even a green horse, because it's widely applicable. I'm kind of gathering that you are so good at this because you have patience to do it incrementally. You're putting the horse's happiness first, because that will serve you guys both in the long run, and just discipline so that you know what you want and the horse comes to expect what kind of the cause and effect is, which they're kind of simple concepts, but so hard to actually be diligent about and follow through with. And just the nature of this endeavor, so many questions come up. That's why I was like, we could talk for hours and my questions wouldn't be done. So simple, but I mean, there's just so much to kind of learn and stick to. So thank you for being our expert tonight and teaching us all of these things. I think there are a lot of people listening who will find comfort in it. And I think their horses will find comfort in the fact that now they know some of these things. And it was such a pleasure to talk to you, especially, I mean, you're taking time on a national holiday. So thank you for all of it, Kate.
Thank you so much. It's actually a local holiday, but it's okay. And look, I've had a great time. It's again, I could have talked for hours as well. So I really appreciate the time that you've had me on, and thank everyone for their questions. And look, it's such a rewarding experience if you can get a thoroughbred. They're such quick learners, but work with a coach or work with someone that's experienced. And because sometimes it's just a couple of those little key fundamentals along the way that can make a big difference. So yeah, no, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Totally amazing. Well, thank you, Kate. I hope that our paths cross again. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.